glad we were able to make this work out right before the holidays.
Thanks, me too. I'm so excited and honored to be here.
Yeah, shout out to Ernest for nominating you and everybody, the whole cabal for voting you on to the podcast. This is what the people wanted and this is what they're getting. So I love how that works out.
Me
So
too.
just oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
go for it.
I was just
No,
gonna
you go for
say,
it.
to start off, I was just curious because Ernest in his nomination wrote that you used to be a molecular biologist, which is very different from what you're doing now and what everybody knows you as.
That's so, I know, I get this a lot. Everyone's like, what? Who are you? And like, how did this come to be? Um, I studied molecular biology undergrad because I
Okay.
just like loved science and I love solving problems.
Yep.
And then after school, I was working in a bunch of labs and was like, oh, okay, I'll go to medical school because I want to like help people and impact people. And then as I was applying, I was like, wait, the best way to like scale your impact is not by necessarily being a doctor. And so I went into kind of like impact consulting and kind of did 0 to 1 new companies, brands, strategies, new business functions for existing companies. And then
Okay.
from there, ended up doing the same thing at Morgan Stanley for all their family office clients. And then Morgan Stanley was also like exploring a lot of crypto stuff. So they did like the 1 to 1 Bitcoin exposure fund before the Bitcoin ETF even came out. And then we were looking for like a crypto donation platform. And so from there was like, oh, wait, why am I doing this for like a large traditional bank? I should just go full on and work in DeFi. And so that was kind of like how I ended up going. But I think the molecular biology is like, oh, I just like love solving problems and getting to like
Yeah.
how do things work. And like molecular biology is, I think, like one of the most, other than physics, like fundamental ways of understanding like how things come to be. And I feel like I still like it's more like the scientific method that drove a lot of what I do.
Have you ever thought about doing any sort of like DeSci projects with it? Like after you got into crypto and figured out how that side worked, like have you ever thought about meshing those two interests of yours?
Yes, I have. And I feel like I need someone to, this is like so embarrassing, but I almost feel like I need someone to like hold my hand and like navigate the world of DeSci because it's hard on the outside to be like, wait, I know the problems that I think affect
Mm.
academic research or like creating a pharmaceutical startup, but I don't know. Like, there's just so many things I feel like that are out there. So if I had like a month sabbatical where I could just sit down and explore, I would. But I'm like, I kind of want a buddy to help me
I
just because it's like
actually,
overwhelming.
yeah, there's actually a good friend of mine, Matt Stevenson, who's also based in LA that I should connect you with. And I know he is he's like thought a lot about all of this stuff. So I should definitely connect you guys and
Oh my
you should
God,
talk to
I
him
would
about it.
love that.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
I would
yeah.
love that. I feel like a noob. I feel like I'm like back in like physics 101 trying to figure out how the hell to navigate the DSci arena.
Yeah, I feel like I knew like a number of people who are working on DeSci projects back in 2021 during the last like big wave, and then I haven't really heard much about it like in the last couple of years. I don't know why necessarily. It seems like it's dropped off, but I still think there's huge potential there, and I've always thought projects in that space were really cool.
Yeah, same. Also, I remember that from like 2021, but I was like deep in DeFi then and was like, I'm not gonna just like jump ship. But then I feel like a lot of projects you just like I like don't know what happened to them during the bear market.
Yeah.
And like you can't really tell from social because you're like, they haven't really posted, but that doesn't mean they're up to anything. But I know that there's one called Hair DAO that is like focused on like how to address like male pattern baldness or like thinning hair. And like my
Preach.
family has a history of thin hair. So I was like, oh, I actually need this DAO. Like I need whatever they're working on. So that might be where I like get my foot in the door to
Ooh,
learn more.
yeah. I have not heard of that, but that sounds very interesting. And I hope it helps a lot of people in the
Thanks.
future. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so you're working at Morgan Stanley, you're in like deep TradFi, and then you, from what I know, and tell me if I'm totally off, is then Farcaster came around, Warpcast was made. You were one of the earliest users on Warpcast, grew a following there, kind of exploded on Warpcast, and then at some point decided to go full on creator route on Warpcast and quit your job at Morgan Stanley. Is that somewhat accurate?
Uh, there, it's like a little bit. I'll clear it up. I
Okay.
left Morgan Stanley to go work for a DeFi startup. One of like the first real world asset protocols that was like merging TradFi and DeFi together. We did under collateralized loans in
Mhm.
emerging markets. And so I was there and I was like, okay, I only know traditional finance, like the culture of like crypto there. So it was like very Bitcoin, like very just like top level Ethereum. And I was like, I need to like if I'm going to work for a startup, I need to like understand the culture. And I wasn't on Twitter. And so my friend at the time was like, oh, there's this new kind of like crypto social network that you could join where I'm sure you'd like get better signal to noise and it's like brand new. So, maybe you'll get access better, you'll like learn better. And so I onboarded then as I was starting at this new company and kind of just like asked all the questions that I would ask. And it was a bunch of crypto OGs too. So I would like
Mhm.
have a ton of questions about like, oh, why is this the way that it is? Or like, I don't understand these politics about kind of like Ethereum or Solana. And I would get like really high quality answers from a variety of people. And so that's when I was like, okay, I could also create a Twitter or which I did, or I could just like continue spending more and more time on Workcast where like people actually respond to what I'm posting. Whereas on Twitter, like I had nobody, I had like 10 followers. So like no one cared or no one ever responded. So that was how it happened. And then I just continued posting and then everything ended up taking off. So it was like quite accidental in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I was gonna ask how you like what your original plan with Warpcast was, and it sounds like there wasn't really like a goal or a plan with it. It was just check it out, like you asked a lot of questions, you had a lot of good learnings, discovered a lot of like OG like quality people on there, and that was enough to keep you around through the early days when the app itself was probably quite janky, right? And like the UI wasn't super good.
It was so bad. Like the app, we laugh about it. Like the app was so bad. Like you couldn't delete anything. Um, you couldn't see who like liked anything. So like I would always be like, "Oh my God, I have a like," and it would always be from Dan. Like Dan, I kid you not, would just like everything in someone's
Yep.
feed. There was no direct messaging. There was no like everything was like so janky. And so then I would just like I was like, this isn't working. So I just take screenshots and send them as bug reports. And so I ended up like, that's how I think I ended up just like getting close with the team was because I was like, nothing works. And also, I think a lot of people at that time like weren't using like Instagram or like other platforms. So I was like, this is better UX or like, oh, look at this, etc. That's how I ended up doing it. But it was, yeah, it was so janky. And I ended up just meeting like tons of other like earnest, like
Hmm.
curious people and it was the people, and everyone says that, like the product itself early on that kept people staying wasn't necessarily the product. It was like this culture and group of people who are like, techno optimists and very helpful and collaborative and kind of like non-zero sum.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember getting onboarded pretty early when Dan was still doing like just one-on-one calls onboarding people, and I was like, I have no idea who this guy Dan Romero is. I have no idea what that is. It like my friends like sent me this and was like, you should totally like do this, and I was like, okay, whatever. It's like a 15-minute call. I can do that, but I had no idea what it
Yeah.
was. I got on the platform, super super janky. I just like didn't have the patience to stick around and deal with it. I didn't really understand what was going on. Like I was already on crypto Twitter at that point, and that's where all of my friends were, and so I just like forgot about it for like a year, and then they sort of blew up, earlier. Um, was it only earlier this year? Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it
which
was
is
just like
crazy.
earlier this year, and that's when I got back on it and tried to get more active on it and things like that. I also wanted to ask though, like when you discovered Farcaster, I believe Lens was also around at that same time. They sort of had similar timelines of growing in this like decentralized social ecosystem. Did you ever check out Lens or did you ever like make that comparison in your mind between Farcaster and Lens and how you like chose which ecosystem you wanted to dive deeper into?
To be honest, I did try. I explored Lens, but at the time, I think you had to have a wallet set up and pay for your username. I forget what it was. Like
Mm.
there was either you either needed to have like an access code or you needed to like mint something to get on it. And for me at that time, I was just like, this is too much of a hurdle. And like,
Yeah.
I just want to like sign up. And at the it's ironic now because Farcaster now has like I was onboarding tons of people at DevCon and was like, oh my God, they were all scoffing at having to create like a pay a $5 fee. And I'm like, oh, I forgot that I like everyone, you didn't have to pay it either. You just like had to sit through 15 minutes with Dan to get on. And so like I was like, oh
Right.
no, the onboarding process for Farcaster was actually like much more seamless. There was no barrier to entry. And after that, I was like, oh, to your point, like I already had like I had like Twitter. I was like, had to pay attention to Twitter. I had Instagram. I had everything else. I was like, why do I need to like a whole nother one? So I kind of just stuck with the one that I was already onboarded with.
I actually didn't know until you just said that you have to pay $5 to create a Farcaster account. I had
It
no
might be,
idea.
yeah, it might be $3 now. I think they continue to lower it, but their whole take is like, if it was free, we would just have an influx of spam all the time. So we need like some sort of
That's fair.
spam barrier. And I get that, but it was pretty brutal when we were onboarding people at DevCon. We like had a free code, but if they didn't input the free code, they're like, I have to pay for this. Like you should see like the look in people's faces. I was like, oh, this is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of onboarding, how has your experience been onboarding people like other than that initial hurdle of having to pay $3 or $5 or whatever? Has it been relatively easy to onboard people or like relatively hard? And have most of the people you've tried onboarding been people who are in crypto already or like non-crypto people?
This is a great question. And I think every person who works in crypto should try to onboard their friends to any apps that they're using and get feedback because I'm like, okay, your friends will be honest with you and they'll be like, what is this?
Yeah.
Um, so like when it first came out at the beginning, when it was still janky, when like you and I onboarded, I actually sent it to my entire team at the time and was like, you guys, you should get on this. And I sent them all an invite code and like none of them used it. And now it's funny because one of my like ex-colleagues, he now works for Farcaster. Like he even like he was like, nah, I'm not gonna sign up, or he like didn't bother to. And now I'm like,
Amazing.
dude, now you work there.
Yeah.
Um, then some of my non-crypto friends I onboarded because I was like, oh, it's like interesting. Like you can build a platform or a brand here. And they kind of like churned relatively quickly because they were like, it's all crypto content. Like people are talking about like crypto startups or like a whole bunch of other stuff. So they were like, eh. Then I onboarded some other people who like are understand crypto when the degen and like all of the tipping and now more recently with like the AI agent stuff comes and they get it because they're like, oh, this is interesting and it's a good way to learn. But otherwise, I actually am like kind of hesitant. And I've told this to the team. I'm like kind of hesitant to onboard new people because the content isn't what I know most of like my non-crypto friends
Yeah.
are interested in from a content perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say even like trying to re-onboard myself earlier this year when I made a goal to like get back on Warpcast and check it out and stuff, that was pretty challenging just because I feel like everything was changing so fast that the Warpcast I saw when I tried coming back earlier this year was not at all the Warpcast I saw the first time I onboarded onto it. It was so different. Like I didn't know what the channels were all about. Luckily, I had some people give me some tips about how to have a good time on Warpcast. And back then it was like, which was like earlier in 2024, it was basically explore channels, find channels that you're interested in. So I found like the snow channel with like all the skiing content and stuff. And like that was the stuff that I thought was really fun. And then of course, like about 6 months later, like in late 2024, channels got a makeover and the whole channels thing changed where you now had to like get membership in a channel in order to post in it. It just became a lot more gated and almost felt more like a closed Telegram group chat than it did like an open forum to meet people and to like discover new things, which I don't think either one is like better or worse, but I just think it like completely changed the purpose of them and how people use them. So it was really confusing. Like all this to say, it was really confusing for me as somebody who's like crypto native to figure it out that I just couldn't even imagine trying to onboard a friend who's like not in crypto at all onto Farcaster.
Yeah. I think this is amazing feedback because I actually had the same feedback. I was like, wait, like I can't post in a topic that I'm interested in posting unless I get permission from someone who like may or
Right.
not grant me the permission. And I agree with you. And I think a lot about, I think what happens with teams who ship really fast, so like warp past teams, as you said, like they ship a lot of new features just to like test to see what will work. And I think about, the Uber app where like if you tried to onboard someone to the Uber app now, you actually see like 500 things. It's not just like order a ride, it's like order a car, order a limousine, order Uber
Yeah,
Eats. It's like there's 1,000 things and then there's like an ad too. And you're like, wait, 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 what's the purpose of this app? Is like if you haven't been using it for the past decade and like just tried to join today, you'd be like, wait, there's so many things going
true.
on. And
Mhm.
I feel like that happened a little with Warpcast too, where even I was like, there's so many buttons and like I don't even know what all these buttons mean. But I hope that like through time they just like continue to simplify it. I just think they ruthlessly ship and ruthlessly prioritize and sometimes don't always cut back. But that's good feedback. I also agree with like it used to be like, oh, you come and you can like post wherever and like find interesting people. And then I was like, oh, people aren't posting as much because they like can't go post in a topic that they're interested in.
Yeah, like initially I
Yeah.
was like, this is all just serious talk on Warpcast, like very, which is like useful if you're
Yeah.
trying to learn and that's your goal. Like it's super useful. For me, I was like, I just wanted to check out a new social platform, have fun, meet people. And I
Hmm.
didn't want it to be like an educational experience all the time and so serious and heavy all the time. And so that kind of got me off of it. And then when I rejoined and I discovered channels and I discovered like all this ski content and all this like non-crypto related content, I was like, wait, this is kind of fun. I am meeting new people with similar hobbies to me that are not crypto. And like I'm
Hmm.
kind of enjoying this. This is a breath of fresh air from crypto Twitter. And then once that kind of went away, I think I went back to
Yeah.
like just like I don't know what to do here anymore, sort of thing. Um, do you find like maybe you have like more insight into this because you're closer to the team, but do you know like what their long-term plan is or like just what their growth strategy is moving forward? Because to me, it seems like the growth strategy so far, especially when comparing Farcaster to Lens, is like Lens started out and they were just focused on like growth, like literal like growth numbers, number of users growth. Whereas I feel like the Farcaster team was more took a more like slow and deliberate approach to growth where they valued quality over quantity a little bit. So that was like the main difference I saw before. I think at this point, like there's enough users on Farcaster and on Lens, and they both have like things they do really well and then their own problems. Where I'm curious to see where they go in the future and like what the trajectory of just decentralized social is moving forward.
Same. And I think a lot of us are still like wondering like what like will decentralized social succeed? Like it's almost
Yeah.
like a 10 to 20 year play. I think the biggest difference that is like almost the easiest way to synthesize it between like what Lens and Farcaster is that Lens is kind of like decentralized, believes in like decentralization, protocol led growth, meaning like there is no one central like one major client that's driving a lot of growth or usage, whereas the Merkle team behind Farcaster and Warpcast believes in like product led protocol development, meaning like okay, we want one key product to drive tons of growth or like to attract users, and then once there's enough users on the protocol, then the developers will come because developers at the end of the day, like their number one priority is just like building for users. Like they want people to actually be using their app. And so that's why we see like such a dominant client with like Warpcast on Farcaster. I think from their like long-term view or like what is their focus, I think right now they like want to win crypto as like a space. Like, okay, how do we
Mhm.
like get the majority of crypto people to be using Warpcast? And I think what they've nailed it down to is like, okay, how do we have like seamless transactions? Is like that's the jankiest thing like in all of crypto
Yeah.
right now. Is like, okay, how do you have like a seamless transaction? How do we make this like an S tier developer experience? So you can see them really leaning into that with a lot of the new iteration of frames where like developers and frames and the apps that they're building inside are like front and center, which reminds me of early Facebook. I don't know
Mhm.
if you remember like all of the poking or Farmville, where like that was like
Yeah.
getting people to come back every single day. And it was like a very robust developer ecosystem, especially because there was like this constant Twitter comparison. And like the only thing that they have over Twitter is like A, it's programmable social, so you can like have all these agents, and then B, it's open API and open data. So like you're never going to beat Twitter on distribution. So it's kind of like what is the other edge that you could possibly have? And then other
Yeah.
than that, I think they don't know. I think if they had it figured out, they would be doing it. um, but I don't know if any of us know.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing you just said too, is that they'll never beat Twitter on distribution. Is that like, do you believe strongly that Web3 social can never outperform Web2 social in terms of distribution?
Well, maybe they'll never beat Twitter in terms of distribution in the near term. Like I shouldn't say never. Uh, I think it'll be different. I don't know. I think a lot about this is like, okay, they're in theory, I think I think as a protocol, Farcaster will definitely at some point, if it succeeds, have more users or have as many users as, let's say, like TikTok and Twitter and Instagram. And then that's it at the protocol level. And then each individual app, I don't necessarily know. I think like the promise and like the beauty of like crypto is that a lot of apps don't need to become reliant on, let's say, like ad revenue or different, like it basically diversifies your revenue stream or makes it better for independent developers. So you don't
Right.
necessarily need to see like astronomical numbers of users to build like a thriving, just like successful app. So I think on the app level, we might see smaller numbers, but on a protocol level, we'll see comparable if it succeeds down the road.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know the answer to that personally, and I think I would tend to agree with you if I had to pick a side. But yeah, it was just interesting to. I'm like curious to hear from your perspective because you're so deep in Farcaster, you know, whereas I feel like I'm very like fringely there ish. So I feel like you have a much better perspective on all of that than like I would.
You're selling yourself short. I think sometimes when you're like too in it, it can also be blinding. Like I
Mm,
always try
that's
to be
true.
realistic. People are like, "Oh, this and that." And I'm like, "Yeah, like all of your pain points and like everything you're saying is true. Like those are weaknesses or those are like huge challenges." Um, and I think it's more important to be like honest about that versus like overly optimistic or like delusional in some ways because I'm like, otherwise you're not actually going to like fix the problems that people are sharing. Like, I'm like, you have to fix that in order to like, hit the goals. So I don't know. I think your perspective is actually like higher signal or like than mine, only because like, I don't know, sometimes when you're like in it, you're like too in it and too in the weeds to have something rational to say.
That's no, that's a fair point. That's a fair point too, and that's a good awareness to have as well. I want to go back to like your personal journey and how you've been able to build this community because I think you're like one of the most successful community builders on Farcaster at least, and I just want to like hear more about the way that you think about it and any tips that you have for other people who are trying to build community, whether for their project or like independent content creators trying to build a community or what have you. So you currently have well, I pulled these numbers a little while ago, but 378,000 followers was when I checked maybe a week or two ago, which is crazy. And you're one of the most followed accounts on Warpcast. And so I know, like you were saying, when you first started, it wasn't really intentional to become a content creator on Warpcast or to grow a following or anything like that. You were just there to learn. But at what point did you start to realize, like, wait, there's something here. I'm picking up momentum. Can I make this something more than just like a casual social platform?
That's a good question. And I have to just be honest with everyone is that the reason that I have so many followers is because Workcast at the time had like instituted a auto follow list because they were like, oh, if you join the app and like you're not following anybody, then you're just going to see like an empty feed and that's not a good
Mm,
user experience. So like we'll curate a list of like a top 200 accounts, and based on some like interest, we'll like make you auto follow like 50 people. And so
Oh,
I was on that list. So it's actually like kind of embarrassing because I'll meet people in person and they'll be like, "Oh, what's your work past?" And I'll be like, "It's Ted." And then they're like, "Oh wait, like how am I already following you?" And it's like
that's not, no, but
so
like,
embarrassing.
honestly, I don't think it's embarrassing. I think it's super cool that you got yourself, like, obviously there was a reason how you got yourself onto that auto follow list, right? Like that's like how,
That's true.
let's just start there. Like how did you get
That's
yourself
true.
onto this auto follow list? Because that's not embarrassing at all, and that's like really cool.
Thank you. I always try and cringe, but thank you for keeping me honest.
Yeah.
I think at the time too, to like what you said or what I heard my friend say was I was like, I remember I was like texting Dan one time and I was like, is it okay if I post like non-crypto content? Like, can I post like a photo of like, you know, the sunset? Like, I didn't know what was okay. And he was like, please post anything that you want to post. And so from there, I started just posting kind of like all of my thinking or kind of like, oh, here's a cool photo from whatever. And I would just share snippets of my life and I would ask a ton of questions. And so I think I was like, oh, I was like treating it almost as like a journal in a way. It was like, oh, here's a thought that comes to my mind. Like, I don't really know how I think about it, but like, let me put it out there. I think the same way that a lot of people use, or I don't know. Now I'm like, I don't know what people use Twitter for, but like, I think
Yeah.
everyone has different ideas. But I was just like, this is just like basically from my mind to the Farcaster protocol. And I think it was also at a time when like I think you said like people were like, "Oh, it's serious," and I agree with that. It was like pretty serious, and so I would try and just like post random stuff too. And I think because it was refreshing to be like, "Oh, this is somebody who's like just posting whatever they want," people were attracted to that. And then also because it was just authentic. Like I wasn't trying to achieve X, Y, or Z. I was just like, "Oh, here's my life," and I think it's now pretty across the board. I think people know this is like authenticity always wins. And so that was how I ended up meeting tons of people because like those like initial replies would turn into larger conversations. You'd exchange telegrams or like numbers and then you'd end up getting coffee or doing a meetup. And so then when I realized like the moment for me where I was like, oh, there's something here was actually I was like, oh wait, like I have a network now where I can go and again, like most people in crypto already know this or who was doing Twitter. It was like, oh, I was like, oh, I can go to any city in the US or outside of the US and meet somebody from Farcaster and like have a 4 hour dinner with them and talk about anything and everything and like walk away being like, wow, that was an amazing conversation. And so I was like, this is the best way to like grow. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I believe in like you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so then I was like, oh, this is like the best place where I want to be like spending my time with and I want to meet the people spending their time here because I just felt like I was becoming a better person as a result of it. And so that was
Yeah.
it. It wasn't necessarily like I always am like afraid of the number because I'm also like it's a lot of bots too because there's like bots on every platform and I'm like I probably at the end of the day maybe have like I don't know how many, but I do think to me before I was always private and you've known this, I'm sure you know this, is like, oh, this was what actually clicked for me was like understanding like, oh, this is the value in building a personal brand was like, oh, do you want to come to this dinner? Like, oh, do you want to, are you interested in this? And like you just all these doors end up opening like just as a result of building a personal brand because you have a reputation out in the world now that isn't just limited to like the 10 people that you work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure too, at some point, like there's this thing that shifts where you're like, okay, I've got, now I've got 1,000 people following. Now I've got 10,000 people following me. Now I've got 100,000 people. Like at some point during that, you're like, what is this for? Like, it can't just be for a bunch of people following me for my photos and my sunsets. Like what can I
Yeah.
do? What more can I do with this? And I think a lot of people in that I've met in crypto, but I'm sure just across the board, people who are really good at like connecting other people, like people who just have huge networks and they're connectors of people. I think that's like a really important skill set, but also a really hard skill set to identify and quantify and recognize because I think people who are good at that is like it seems like, oh, I'm just like I know you and I know them and like you're talking about DeSci and I know they're really good at DeSci and so why would I not connect to you, especially when you live in the same city? Like it's not like work. It's not like I'm like
Yeah.
really I don't feel like I'm racking my brain for that or like working or like really thinking about it. that hard. And so it's hard to see that as work. But I think that like this is something that like Humpty from the Crypto Sapiens podcast has been putting me onto recently. It's like, no, this is like really important work and a really important skill set. Like, I'm wondering at what point you realize that, because I think you must have realized that when you started your hyper sub and you realized how you can monetize your community, and you also like launched these far cons to further that connection even more, to like deepen that connection like through in-person contact, things like that. So I'd be curious to hear like when that shifted for you and like how that thinking exactly shifted.
This is I'm like, how did it happen? I'm trying to think is in I guess like also part of my first job when I was doing consulting was our clients were okay, our clients were like celebrities, brands, like luxury brands, new startups, and then also big tech. And so part of our role, and I think we're seeing this more and more, was to basically connect the dots between all of those clients so that everything was mutually beneficial. So let's say like one of our clients was Instagram. Instagram had a new feature that we had scoped out, and then all of a sudden they needed to launch it. What's the best way to maximize your launch? It's actually to partner with celebrity accounts who have like the biggest distribution anyways. And so we were like constantly connecting the dots between our clients so that we could like find all these like mutually beneficial ways that kind of like enhanced our work and then also made us more valuable as consultants on the project. And so it worked really well. Like I saw it work over and over and over again. And it actually was incredible. Like one of our celebrity clients who was like up and coming, then all of a sudden became like the spokesperson, or not spokesperson, but like was kind of like the it girl for one of the luxury brands that we were working with like 2 years down the road. And so you would like see the fruits of your labor pay off like both immediately and then in the long term. And so I think I just took that mentality with me wherever I went afterwards and was like, okay, at Morgan Stanley, same thing. Like there was like so many family office clients, and it's like, how do you actually can like introduce them, and they would like come together and do incredible things. Otherwise, they never would have known. And so the same principles apply in crypto too. And I think when I started my hyper sub, I was kind of like, okay, I have no idea who's going to start it. I have all these followers, but I want to know who like it's like Dunbar's number. You can actually only have like a certain number of close friends. And so I was like, I can't reply to everybody on all my cast, but I want to know, like, I do want to continue building like deep relationships with people. And so I was like, okay, I'll launch a hyper sub with a capped number. And this will be like my community that I like really invest in, because I can't continue to just like reply to every single person. It's just like, I don't have enough time in the day. And have found like so many people end up like partnering, or is like tons of founders, and then they end up connecting the dots or working together, like, okay, here's like a campaign that we can all run together. And you're right, like I never think about it as work, because it's just like fun. Like seeing your friends or seeing your community succeed and do well is just like the greatest form of enjoyment and fulfillment. And so I'm the same as you. It's like I don't think about it as work. But I realize like, okay, it is very valuable, and usually the things that add value are considered work.
Right, right, right. Yeah. What have you found to be some of the most challenging things along the way of growing your following, of maintaining that following, of trying to come up with new ways to engage your community? Like, what have been some of the biggest challenges you faced?
Ooh, crypto is like fickle. Crypto is like very
Hmm.
fickle and can sometimes be vapid. And so it's always like, okay, I think it's harder than anywhere else, even like when I was working with a lot of like the celebrity or entertainment clients where a lot of stuff is superficial. It's like, oh, it's actually hard to know like who's here for the long term and who's not. So I think kind of just getting better at figuring that out has been a big challenge for me, or like, oh, who's simply talking to me because I have a large following, or even like after you do something big, like, oh, you do this like huge, FarCon, and then it's like, okay, but who here is like just trying to get something out of me versus like, oh,
Right.
okay, like who is genuine. And so that has been a little bit challenging. And then I think something else is just like I've always been a private person, and the more that you put yourself online, like the more that people are going to see you, and not everyone's going to like you. And I've always been like very independent, and like not everyone's going to like me anyways. But it's different when like crypto typically like operates online. And so in the real world, like if you don't like somebody or someone doesn't like you, you kind of just like don't have to interact. But online, you don't get that benefit. Like
Right.
if people don't like you, they can just like always be there. I think that's fine. It's like 20% of people you meet in life like will never like you, no matter what you do, no matter like how nice you are, no matter what you do, they just won't like you. But like online, you just like what are you gonna do? Like block them? Like I don't know. I just am not like a blocker person. So it's just like okay, you just have to deal with people who like talk shit. And that
Yeah.
can be hard.
Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree. And it's like obviously easier said than done. Like, ignore the haters. Also, like, you haven't really made it until you have haters. Like, sometimes I'm like, why is the rehash community so nice? Where are the haters? Like, someone
No,
come hate
it's
on us
because
just so like I can feel like I've made it.
no, you have made it. I was telling someone before where I'm like turning the podcast around on you, is I genuinely believe that all of the best podcasts in the future will follow the same kind of like process, structure, etc., as what you've done with Rehash. Like if you think about it, this is how like if you look at Spotify and like everything that all of like these new podcasters are doing, they're like engaging with their communities more and more. And I was like, oh, you've been doing this for like months and years of like, okay, how do you get the community involved? And like, how can they verify that like, okay, like you're doing what they've asked you to do and like, oh, you care about them and like I don't know. I just am like, oh, I can see this being like a new standard that people end up following in years to come, even if it takes a few years to like pick up. You've had to deal with all the janky apps too. But yeah, I think I was like, yo, your community is awesome because you've like, they have skin in the game and like you do exactly what they kind of like vote on and it's like collaborative and it works together. Like, why would you have any haters for that? Like, you've done the best that you could possibly do. Anyways, I'm
I
sure there will be
appreciate
someone
it.
who finds a reason to
I
hate, but
appreciate
I'm like, there's
actually.
no way.
Well, no, I really appreciate that. And now that I think of it, we have had one person who I think had nominated himself in our elections for like three seasons in a
No,
row and got like no votes like at all for like three
no.
seasons and messaged me and was like, I'm returning my NFT. Like, where should I send this? Like, I don't want any part of this anymore. Like, no one cares about what I'm doing. And so that has, now that I think of it, like that has happened one time. Um so yeah, like that's bound to happen. But also I I feel like what I've done with Rehash is the innovative part of it is putting it on chain, right? Before anybody else really did. But the rest of it isn't really that innovative, I think. Like, it's like you said, it's like any content creator from the beginning of time has known that it's all about your community. Like, you don't have anything without your community. And so it's all about community building and it's all about building that authentic relationship with your community. And maybe it's because, so prior to this, I was travel blogging for a couple of years. And so maybe it's from that experience that I learned just like how important it is to have an engaged community and how to engage them and how to like build relationships with them. And it is a lot of work and it's, really hard to like scale, which is why you launched your hyper sub so that you can focus on building meaningful relationships with a smaller group of people. But that's really like what Rehash did, is just continue doing that. And I think maybe it stood out in the crypto space because crypto projects forget about that or maybe don't know about it.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot. Actually, I want to get your take on it is like, a lot of the creator platforms, for instance, they're like, no, 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 like crypto is the future of creators because like you can make money on chain. But I'm like, no, but if you talk to any creators, like the most, like their number one priority is like community and like creative expression or creative freedom.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh, like if you're too hyper focused on the money aspect, you like completely overlook like the basics of like, oh, building community and like bringing people along with you. And like, okay, you can't lead too much with the money aspect because then you're going to only attract people who like care about whatever incentive you're like is the carrot. Whereas I'm like, oh, you just get it. Like you're like, no, 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 I've had to build a community before. I know how to lean on them. I know how to keep them engaged. Yeah, I think a lot of I agree, I guess. There's a lot of people in
Yeah.
crypto just it's like you think it'd be intuitive, but It's not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and like I absolutely think the money part of it is very important as well. Like the only way for creators to stick around and keep creating is if they're getting funded. Like if you're not getting
Yeah.
funded at a certain point, like you have to make money to eat and have a roof over your head, right? Like it's not all like as sexy as it sounds either.
Yeah.
But I do think that the mistake that maybe some crypto companies or just people in general make is what you're saying, like leading with money. Like that's, you can't lead with that. Like if you're not, if you're like, working at Morgan Stanley and you've never built a following online or done any sort of content creation and you're like, man, I'm just like really sick of my Morgan Stanley job and I just want to go be like one of those content creators online and have the freedom and
Yeah.
flexibility of the life that they live. And I want to think about how I can make as much money as I'm making at Morgan Stanley, but like without this stupid job with like my horrible boss. It's like, okay, if
Yeah.
that's your mentality, like you're probably not going to make it because you're
No.
not leading with the foundation of what you need in order to make money sustainably over the long run, which is that community building. Like you have to
Yeah.
start with like that, I mean, grunt work, which is also just
Yeah.
like really fun. Like you should also enjoy it probably to a certain extent if that
Yeah.
is what you want to do, or else it's gonna feel like the same as your Morgan Stanley job.
Yeah.
um, but yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, you nailed it. And also, I think people forget that building any social following is hard work. Like,
yeah,
very rarely does it just like all of a sudden happen overnight. And I think a lot of people look at me and they're like, oh, and I was like, I feel like this same about you is like, oh, you're on season 3. You've like learned and you've iterated over and over again. And like you have to put in the time to promote and edit and make sure it's like a great experience. And I was like, I remember, yeah, I'm just like everything is hard and like everybody has to start from zero sometimes. And I think as we get older, it's like, oh, there's so many things that I'm like, I don't want to start at zero again.
right.
Um, and I think if I had a Twitter, to be like totally candid at the time, like I probably wouldn't have put as much effort into Warpcast or Farcaster because I was like, oh, I already have something else to spend time on, but like it met a unique need for me because I didn't have a Twitter account at the time and I didn't have like any following and it was like completely filling a need that I didn't have.
I'm so glad you said that because I've asked that to like Humpty and other people that are big on Farcaster. And I'm like, be honest. Like, do you think that you would have spent as much time on Farcaster if you already had a really big following on Twitter? And they were all like, yeah, it's like about the principle of it, like we want like a decentralized platform and all of that. And I'm like, okay, I feel like you're bullshitting me. Like, just be honest. Because I do think
I
like,
would, yeah,
yeah, right. And so like I think, yeah, I would think like what you just said to be true if people are like really honest about it.
yeah. And I think we have to be honest. Like I've told this to Dan too, because he was like, "Oh, you put up a bunch of like TikTok videos. Like, why don't you post them to like Warpcast?" And I'm like, "Okay, one, like I just don't think it's the vibe." Like I was like, sometimes it's just like not the vibe. I was like, I think I would just like annoy people. And then like second, TikTok gives you like massive distribution. So it's like,
Mhm.
why would I guess I could just like copy and paste the video back over and like I have done that in the past, but like like on TikTok you're like interacting with a completely different audience and it
Right.
has like oh, I'm learning so many different things. It's like, oh, actually posting the video on both platforms doesn't really make that big of a difference. So like why I guess I could like cross post, but again, to your point, like I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know if anybody who has a huge Twitter following, and we've seen it like time and time and time again. The only person who's like done it consistently is actually Vitalik, I think. Is like the only person with like and Dan, like who have like massive followings
Yeah.
who've like spent more time on Workcast than they spend on Twitter.
Right. And like Vitalik
Yeah.
is Vitalik. So we don't need to like dissect that
Yeah.
one too much, like we know what's going on
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Yeah, there's very, very few examples of people who have big followings, like really, really big followings on Twitter and Warpcast. But that's something I struggled with too is like, do I just like what do I post on Warpcast? Like, do I just cross post what I'm posting on Twitter onto Warpcast? Like, I don't see the point really in doing that. And then if I'm to come up with original content for Warpcast, like I don't have all day to like I'm just trying to like manage my Twitter, you know? Like I don't have all day to
Yeah,
come up with like original content for Twitter and then for Warpcast. It's a lot of work.
same. Yeah, I think Dan said something fun on a live stream once that was funny. He was like, "Oh, sometimes I use like Warpcast to like workshop my content before I post it to Twitter," which I
Oh,
thought was
funny.
funny because he's like, "You can figure out." And so then I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." So then I started thinking about doing that too because I was like, "Oh, I was like, I don't actually like post on Twitter that much. If you look at the difference, it's like insane. Like I post way more on Farcaster, but that's also because I have more distribution there. So like
Yeah.
I assume vice versa would be true. And so I just like post the same shit sometimes. It's like almost word for word the same stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, people don't care. Like, and then you're like, okay, like I can currently can build both. But I'm like, it doesn't make sense to just completely abandon it, but
Right.
I don't need to like continue. Like, I don't know what the goals are on Twitter. Like, I don't know. I don't think too much about it, but maybe I should think more.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's for me, it's just like where my friends are at, right? It's like where I'm gonna
Yeah.
be because that's where I'm gonna have the most fun. So that's really what it
Yes.
was. And then Warpcast was fun for a while because I was making a lot of new friends on it, with like the channels thing that we talked about. And
Yeah.
once they closed off the channels, I think I was just like, I'm not making new friends here. I have way more friends on Twitter.
Yeah.
So it just like it's hard to motivate myself to spend a lot of time there.
Yeah. And that makes total sense. Like, again, I have made so many new friends on Warpcast. Like, even the other day, I was like, oh, getting dinner with somebody who I knew from Farcaster. Like, my world has like completely expanded. A lot of my like close friends that I've added over the past few years are from Farcaster. It's like really like my family's like, wait, what? You have like internet friends? So I think a primary motivation is like definitely like I want to make friends and just like have fun with new people who like are into the same things. And
Yeah.
I think that channels has always been really hard for the team to like crack. And I still think they haven't necessarily cracked it. It's like going in the right direction. But at this point, I'm like, no, 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 like let everybody, I get it. They're like walking the balance between spam and not spam. But at the end of the day, it's like, I want to, if it's a social networking site, like you want to like quote unquote network, which is such a cringe word, but you want to like meet new people or like connect with the people that you want to have a good time with. Like that's just like point blank. So
Yeah.
I'm with you. I agree. And like I think they haven't nailed it yet, but it's not like the number one priority. I do think it will end up coming back into the realm, but that's really good
Yeah.
feedback. And I'm like,
Yeah.
same. I tried to post in like a channel today, like the economy channel, and I was like, what? I can't post in this channel? Like
Yeah.
it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just like the UI of it's definitely still not as easy to use Warpcast as it is to use Twitter, just from like a
Yeah.
user experience perspective too. And so there's you know that like is a hurdle too. I just think it's really hard in general to build any kind of new social app today, whether it's Web 2 or Web
Yeah.
3, like any because that space is so like there's so much going on in that space already. So hats off to
Yeah.
Dan and the Merkle team for tackling the challenge. And like I know it sounds like I'm being critical of Farcaster, but I am actually like very optimistic for
It's
Farcaster
good to
and
be
where it goes.
critical. Again. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm like, it's good to be critical and I do sense the optimism and I 100 I think people forget that it's like really like even when people are criticizing like Lens or Farcast or any app that's like decentralized social, it's like okay, Naval, like King Naval that like everyone in tech like bows down to. I don't really know that much about him, but they spent like years iterating an app in stealth. The what I think it's called air chat or something. They go
Mhm.
live with it. They were like, okay, great, we have all this funding, let's iterate. And then they ended up closing it down because they were like, it's just not gaining traction. Like building
Yeah.
consumer social apps are it's
So hard.
so hard.
Yeah.
Like so many fail. Like again, you're using let me guess like Twitter and the only new recent one is TikTok and I think even TikTok was founded in like 2017 or 2018. So it's not that recent
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's any new social app I've seen in the last few years that I've checked out. Like what? Be Real was
Oh
like one of
yeah.
them. Do people still use that?
I think it got, I don't know. Like I
Yeah,
don't use it
I
anymore.
don't. Yeah, same. I don't either. But like that's what I'm saying is like that or like Laps, I feel like was like another one that came up in the last few
Oh,
years that people were really, really bullish on for a hot second and then not so much anymore. But most of
hmm
those apps, it's like people are really into it for the first few months or like, whenever, I don't even know, like whenever somebody decides that like whenever Gen Z decides like this is the new app we're using. And then a few months later, it just like dies off. It's really, really
yeah.
hard. Yeah.
I know. The only things I think that could be considered like quote unquote social that I think will stick around for a long time, depending on, I don't know if one will win versus the other, is like Luma and Partiful. Like these event apps are becoming
Yeah.
like more social in nature. But again, then they're not like social networks or like quote unquote social
Right.
media. So I don't know. I'm like, it has to solve a problem, and I don't know what
Yeah.
problems they're solving.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. That's so true. So, what is next for you? Like, what are your goals with like Warpcast or with the FarCon events or what with like whatever? What else are you working? Are you working on other stuff? I don't even know. I just know. I feel like
Oh
everyone just knows
yeah.
you as like the Warpcast queen.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are like, "What do you do?" I did so earlier this year, right before FarCon, there was like a month left to go, and I was like doing both my full-time job and then also FarCon on the side. I was like, okay, for FarCon to actually like happen and like not be a huge disaster, I was like, I do need to quit my job and just like focus on getting this over the line. So I quit in like April, and then had told a ton of people is, oh, okay, I'm going to do like a bunch of like consulting work. And so from there, I was just doing consulting. So kind of like early stage operations, like some marketing, some community ecosystem consulting. And I had kind of a good list of clients and had a wait list and was like, okay, this is great. And then over the course of the summer, I was like, oh, this isn't that fun. Like, I really like being on a team with people.
Yeah.
And I really like having like ownership over a thing and not just like handing it off. And so I'm kind of at a good point right now where I'm like, okay, what like at the fork in the road is like, okay, to scale this up is like I would need to hire people and like build out a services business, which like has never really felt like my calling. Like I was like, I already did
Mm,
consulting once. Like I don't need to
yeah.
redo that. Or is it kind of like start my own thing that's like more, start up, rally the troops, or join kind of another early stage or join a team and go from there. So that's where I'm at personally. And then FarCon passed the baton to a team in New York. So a whole new bunch of volunteers will be putting it on in New York in May. So that's
Oh,
exciting. I'm excited to
exciting.
support them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exciting. I'm curious like about the FarCons, how did that work? Was it just totally permissionless and you were like, I want to organize an in-person event and then like you didn't have to get approval from Dan or anything like that? Like how did you get funding for it? Was it just through outside sponsors or I'm so curious like
Yeah.
how all of that just happened.
Um, there's these two guys who were early forecaster users too, Grin and Cameron, and they did one in 2023 in Boston that was like pretty small in scale, 75 people-ish. And then the next year or later that year, another forecaster user, Graham, was like, "Oh, I want to do the next one, but I want to do it in LA." And so I kind of
Mm,
got the call. I was like, "Hey, I'm going to do this in LA. It would be great to have someone boots on the ground. Do you want to help?" And so I kind of got like I was like, yeah, of course I'd love to help. Never imagined that Farcaster would like take off and become what it was. And so we were like, we'd be stoked if 150 people came to LA for it. And then meanwhile, it was like 500.
wow.
So it is completely permissionless. I think the best way we like sold tickets because we were like, oh, people will pay. We want it to like, we need to cover costs. And we weren't really sure about
Mm,
sponsorships. And then as kind of like we marketed it or just talked more and more about it, there are tons of companies in the ecosystem who are like, hey, can we help you? Like, we see that this is just like fully volunteer. We're happy to sponsor in some way. And so kind of all came to be. But even from that approach, like we were never looking to become like an events production company. It was more so like, let's cover costs and just like make it as enjoyable as an experience because none of us were looking to make this like a full-time business to just like
yeah.
run FarCon every year because it's supposed to be like decentralized and like different people can do it in every year and it would evolve as the network evolved too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
That's
crazy.
that's awesome. So for the next one in New York, you get a little break from that as like not like
Yeah.
the main coordinator at least.
Yes. well, hopefully I can like go and enjoy it because everyone jokes.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh no, like if you're running an event, you just like
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this from Hash House when you were obviously like you'd have fun when you were recording, but all of the like behind the scenes
Yep.
coordination or like you don't really get to enjoy it the same way as you do as a guest. So I'm like
Totally.
super excited to just go as an attendee.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. I am really excited for you to enjoy it too as an attendee for the first time. So
Thank
I
you.
want to do a quick few questions from Twitter. These are just like fun things that the community had for you. And so the first one is from Ernest, who nominated you. And Ernest said, "Pistachio gelato is great, but why isn't Amarena or Stracciatella the best?" Is this coming from
Because
your Warpcast
it's
profile or
just
where is this coming from?
I think I said pistachio is the best ice cream flavor
Oh,
ever. And honestly, pistachio is the best. The only thing that comes close is mint chocolate chip. Sorry.
okay. You're just at the green. It has to be green.
You're right. I didn't recognize
Mhm.
that, but yeah, I just love the color green. That's it.
That's the flavor profile. Okay, Annalisa has a couple of LA
Oh, I
questions for
love
you,
her.
which is
Oh, she's
actually
the best.
great because I'm going to be in LA for the holidays. And so this is selfishly, I want to know the answers to these questions as well.
Okay.
But the first one that she has for you is top three best burgers in the West Side and greater LA region.
Oh shit. Okay. So I love an In-N-Out burger. I know that's controversial sometimes. Some people are like, ew, I think an In-N-Out burger is good. So that's one.
Okay.
The window has I don't know if you've been, it's on Rose Avenue.
Mm-mm.
It's only open before like 4. It has a really good In-N-Out style burger too, but it's like so
Okay.
affordable. It's like great. You can like pick it up. It's not like $100, whatever, like most LA burgers. And then Dudley Market, which is no reservations, but they had one of the best rated burgers in LA I think for a while. It was like, this is the best burger in LA. But it's like different. That one is like the fancy, like very thick, like
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Okay. And
Those are
these are
my
all on the
top
West Side?
3. All West Side. Actually, those are all pretty much Venice.
Okay.
I think Hatchet Hall has a good burger too in Culver, but that's not on my list of top 3.
Okay. Okay, great list. And then her second LA question is fuck, Mary kill. Erewhon.
Ooh,
Is it Gusta? Gu
Justa.
Justa and
Hmm.
Osby?
Ooh, Osby. Okay, if you like Italian food, if you when you're there, Osby
Uh-huh.
is like so good.
Okay.
Um, Fuck, Mary kill. Damn. Okay, I would kill Erewhon because if I married Erewhon, I would be broke. There's
No,
no
but you would be
way.
married to
But
Erewhon. Imagine.
yeah, but I can't, I couldn't. Oh,
Okay.
insufferable. Like sometimes you want like a little bit of a.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
I do
yeah.
love Erewhon. I do feel like
I feel like
rejuvenized.
it
Also,
would be a lot to be married to Erewhon. Yeah.
yeah, a lot.
Mhm.
Marry Justa because I just love Justa so much. They have like it feels European in a way because like
Okay.
you just sit outside on the back patio, sipping your coffee. It's overpriced. It's definitely overpriced, but I just love Justa. Also, I grew up at Justa because I like started going to Justa when I first moved to LA. So Justa's seen like every era of my like
Of your
adult
life.
transformation. Yeah. And I feel like, oh, it just like it gets
It knows
me.
you. Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that means I'd fuck Ospie, which it makes sense. I'm like, it
Yes.
slaps. It's great. It's like so indulgent when you go, like, and then you're like, I need a break from this for a little bit.
I love
Yeah,
that. I love that. I want to know Annalisa's answers to that
I
question
know.
too.
I'm gonna text her. I'm gonna be like, yo, what would you answer?
Yeah, you should. Don't tell her what you said yet and get her answer and see if
I
you guys
won't.
are aligned on that. Um, we had another question from Peachy that
Ooh.
you may or may not be able to answer since you're not planning the next FarCon in New York, but she wants to know what does Ted think Farcaster will look like in April 2025? Um, oh, actually, she said, what will Farcaster look like in April 2025, right before FarCon? Last year felt like peak Farcaster. I love to know how she sees the vibes and waves as someone who's been here through many changes. That's a good
Damn,
question.
that's a great question. It's actually so hard to answer because I don't think anybody anticipated what would happen last time.
Yeah.
I I wish I had a better answer, but I think the team planning it this year, like I think just the core group of like Peachy was like I almost feel like relatively new to Farcaster when FarCon happened, and so there were a lot of new faces who we kind of just were like, oh, they're here for the community, like let's stick around. And if
Mhm.
you think about it, it's just like, oh, that core group of people who now like in April, that's like a whole year. So like the people who will be there have been there like a whole year longer. And so I think FarCon will probably feel exactly the same as last year of like, oh, it's like going to camp or like getting back with the gang or like meeting all your favorite people. And then Farcaster at large, I hope, like genuinely, I hope it's like on the up and up and like it's like euphoric as it was last year, just because it makes everybody, I don't know, like when the vibes are up, the vibes are up.
Yeah.
But I have no idea. 5 months is like eternity in
I
crypto
know.
time. So I don't know. Great question from PG.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Finally, last question I've been asking every guest on season 10 is what is one word that you are putting out there in 2025 that you think will describe crypto in 2025 in just one word? One word or one phrase.
Damn,
Hmm.
this is such a boring word. Finance. I think like
Real.
it's so boring. It's so boring and it's so unsexy. And I don't mean DeFi, unfortunately. I mean just like I think so many fintechs and like finance. I think that is what will adopt crypto next. Like that's the next wave of crypto adoption is more banks, more
Hmm.
fintechs, more wealth techs.
That's exciting
Yeah.
though. That's like a huge step towards like moving crypto forward. So that actually is very exciting, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's exciting. It's not like a hot take. I think it's just like, oh, it's like just some lame
Yeah.
prediction, but it's important because at the end of the day, I'm like, the more money that's on chain, the greater the pull is for
Mhm.
everybody else to get on chain too.
Totally. Yeah, and getting that like traditional the TradFi adoption is like top signal, right? For like all the normies to jump on this.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so true. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Thank you so much, Ted, for taking the time so close to the holidays to join us. Where can people find you? Remind people all over the interwebs where they can find you if they want to follow you on Warpcast, Twitter, TikTok, wherever you are. And then feel free to plug anything else that you'd like as well.
Yay. I'm at Ted on Warpcast or Farcaster, and then Ted Not Lasso on X. And then everybody, if you're not already following Rehash, follow Rehash and follow Tree Girl on Warpcast too. I went to find you and I was like, I know her name is Tree Girl.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
Yeah,
love
I
it.
actually like had so I'm DDW Chen on every platform. And then that was what I made my Warpcast as initially as well. But then, you know how I said I got onboarded and I left and then came back and I
Yeah.
couldn't figure out my like private key that I
No.
used to make it with. And so I thought I lost it. And then Dan came out with this like recovery process. And so I got DDW 10 back, but that was after I had already made Tree Girl and built a following there. And so I just stuck with Tree Girl. So
I love
that's,
Tree. I do look
yeah.
up Tree Girl. Actually, Dan one time he was like, Tree Girl makes really good content. And I was like, he called you Tree Girl. And I
Oh, that's
cracked
so
up. I was
funny.
like, yes. I was like, she does.
That's so funny. That's so funny. Well, thank you again so much, Ted.
Yeah.
Happy holidays. Happy
You
holidays to
too.
everybody listening as well. And we'll talk to you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, I've stopped the recording. Thanks so much. Sorry we went over a little bit.